This comes after a tragic story of 40-year-old Luke Ashton, who took his own life after battling with gambling addiction. He was placing as many as 100 bets a day online. He'd previously raked up nearly £20,000 of debt and had taken out loans to fund his gambling addiction. It was revealed at an inquest that he would place bets early in the morning and late at night when his wife was in bed. Wilfred, we know the figures are very difficult to get an exact figure, but anywhere between 250 to 650 deaths a year of gambling addicts taking their own life because of their gambling addiction. I must declare, just cards on the table, my father was a gambling addict. I made a documentary about my father and his gambling addiction, trying to understand gambling addiction. I made that documentary about, now 12, 13 years ago. So it's something that's very close to my heart. Are we doing enough? And should something like, OK, if you want to place a bet, you're only entitled to place one a day. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I don't think that would be a good idea to say to everybody, the only time you're only allowed to do one bet a day. That's just too much control over people's lives. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there is an issue with gambling addiction. You know, I, for example, what's my habit? I would do the lottery once in a while, and I do the Grand National. I have the type of personality that is not addicted. And what I believe is that these companies should be doing a lot more to help these people who actually have an addiction. And it's sad to hear about your father, but that's what I want to try and understand. How do we help and support these people who obviously have some sort of illness? But you then cannot say, because there's a certain section of people that have this illness, we then got to make sure the rest of society could only gamble once a day. I just think that's unfair to those people where it isn't an addiction.
Amy?
No, I think I would agree with that, but sometimes I think the amount of the problem, there are 300,000 people living in the UK that are considered problem gamblers. So it's not a tiny problem, it's a big problem. And the whole landscape of gambling has changed. Tech has changed. So people can now gamble straight on their smartphones all the time. When I was researching this story, I was suddenly flooded with adverts for gambling sites almost immediately. So I think it's important that the firms take responsibility. For example, William Hill was fined this year after a customer spent £23,000 in 20 minutes. Now, that's why we need limits, I think. So
we need limits for that particular customer, but why then say to me, who actually... It may be that 1 week I fancy putting one or two on. I then shouldn't then be limited because there are a specific number of people.
When you have people putting on larger amounts, there has to be some sort of checking in place, surely.
I agree
when
with
things
that.
are at that big a stake.
So
stake limits, for example.
But there are some gamblers, you know, those people who do roulette where they do put on large sums of money. So, again, it depends on who the individual is. So I wouldn't like to say, well, we're going to limit if you put this sort of money on because, I don't know, some millionaires have a lot of money and they want to put 20,000, 25,000. So,
but it's not impossible for the firms to take responsibility for that and start to do that, to acknowledge this problem.
Well, it's important to say that where we're at the moment with gambling legislation, the legislation we operate on at the moment was brought in by the Labour government in 2005. That's the Gambling Act. Back then, nobody had predicted that you could gamble, as you said, on your smartphone, on an app, 24/7. We were still talking about things like super casinos. Do you remember them? Yeah. Gordon Brown's administration, super casinos are going to go everywhere. But, of course, the landscape has changed. Now we have this gambling white paper, which the government has printed, suggesting a lot of curbs. However, the gambling addiction that we have in the country, the levels of it, have we understood how everybody around a gambling addict is also affected, their families? So, for example, I've spoken to countless families. I remember speaking on that documentary to a lady who had no idea that her husband was a gambling addict. She had no idea up until the point that she heard a knock on the door and it was bailiffs coming to take her home.
Gambling addiction
because her husband had put the mortgage back up and gambled it all. So if it's something that is affecting so many people, Wilfred, I appreciate that it's not that there's millions of people. It's really important to say millions of people in this country gamble without a problem at all. It's really important to say that, I think, and they should continue to do so. But if you've got so many thousands of people affected by gambling addicts, should we not be doing something?
I would like to put it in the same category as smoking. Right. We all know that if you smoke, it's going to damage your health. Now, we haven't banned smoking, but what we've done is certain things so it doesn't become popularized. I don't believe in all of the gambling advertising. I just think that should be...
But we've banned smoking from indoors, for example.
Exactly.
Right? We've banned stuff. So banning people from being able to put more than one bet a day.
We haven't made it easy for people to smoke, which I think is good. And that's the same sort of stuff we should do in terms of gambling over a certain amount of money. So make it more difficult. And that way, you'll then be able to find the people that you have a serious problem, and then you could put something into place to support them. But the worst thing, if we've decided not to ban smoking, why then should we decide to ban gambling? It's just that we educate people, but we don't ban them. It's just the banning.
But no one's saying we should ban gambling. People are saying we should restrict the way that people gamble, but perhaps being able to only place one bet a day. I mean, we banned smoking from pubs.
In certain places, yeah.
And I think that this is the problem is that at the moment the companies are making so much money off the back of this, especially since the pandemic. Rates of gambling are increasing all the time, and they have to take responsibility for these 300,000 problem gamblers, and it shouldn't be underestimated the damage. This is like, I have addiction. I've lost people in my family to addiction, and gambling is no different to alcohol addiction, to drug addiction. The impact on the individual and those around them is exactly the same. So it does need to be taken seriously.